actually going to bring this because this guy over here is making me hot, having to watch him stand the whole time.
You are generous.
If I stand here, am I buzzing? I'm going to try to stand right here, okay? Thank you, Matt.
Thank you.
You guys give Matt a hand, please. Matt is a good friend and someone who, when I first started talking to him, had no idea how many stories were going to come out of this group of radical people in Maine. Got to tell you, this is our first time to, yeah, really, you can applaud for yourselves. You guys are radicals. That's great. This is actually our first time to New England, and so we drove up from New Jersey yesterday. My wife has family in New Jersey. And so we went up through New York, and then you get on the other side of New York City, and you're like, wow, there are trees up here. That's kind of cool. And then you just keep on going, and it's beautiful all the way through Connecticut and then into New Hampshire. We were in New Hampshire last night. Didn't know a whole lot about it. Knew the Free State Project was there. Got the education of a lifetime about the Free State Project, and that's an awesome thing that they're doing down there. So very excited about that, and then coming up here to Maine, and not even, you know, knowing some of your story and what happened in 2012, obviously you know your story better than I do, but knowing some of that story and then, you know, seeing what's happening in New Hampshire, seeing what's happening in Maine, I got to tell you, I'm really surprised. I'm deeply impressed by the liberty movement. It's like some of these states up here in the Northeast were the liberty movement before there was a liberty movement. And that's what we're kind of finding here, and that's an exciting thing. So I just assumed it was a bunch of blue states and everybody was a Democrat. And that's yeah, the way it is. And having said that, we're going to talk about a few things today. I know the vast majority of people here are Republicans. Is that right? Raise your hand if you're a Republican. Okay. Well, most of you, yes. So to be fair, I'm a recovering neocon. Okay, so pray for me. It's just like the Alcoholics Anonymous. You take one step every single day, you recover from that as well. But I beat up on Republicans pretty hard, so I won't give you any favor if you're a Republican, just as much as I beat up on Democrats, because I'm not interested in parties. I think both parties are sellouts. And they're playing the same game, and we're going to talk about that. But they're playing the same game with our constitutional rights, and you all know better than anyone, I don't have to tell you, about how the Republican Party likes to change its own rules and rewrite things as they go, right? You guys know that. By the way, how cool was it seeing you guys all over the internet, because we didn't get to see you on networks, when you were in Tampa, fighting that rule change and fighting to hold on to your spots. I have so much respect for those of you who went down there and you fought for those seats. And even though it appeared, I think, on the surface that you didn't win, I think today we're seeing the ripple effect of all of that, and you have won. You won that fight. You just haven't been able to stand at the winner's circle yet, but it's on its way. It definitely is. So please recognize all those who did go down there to Tampa to fight that. So as we do this, a couple things I want to tell you about. The first thing I want to share with you is a little bit about this project we're working on called the Truth in Media Project. And I want to share with you what that project is about, kind of what we're doing with it right now. Some of you know more about it than others because some of you are helping to back that project and making it a reality. Yeah, and really appreciate those of you who are doing it. So let's talk about that for a minute. When I was at Fox 19, as Matt mentioned, about 2.5 years ago, we started something called Reality Check. And the idea was, it actually wasn't my idea. It didn't come from me. It came from a station consulting firm called AR&D. And AR&D is a research and development firm. And they said, look, we've been looking at the market, and we ran this huge kind of project to determine needs in your market. And there's a huge gap for what they called Snopes-style journalism. They said no one is really, excuse me, no one is really fact-checking what's going on out there. And they said this is an opportunity for you guys. And so they said there's actually a station. I'm going to tell you guys how this really happens. They said there's a station in Minneapolis that's doing a segment called Reality Check. And we think that you guys could do the same thing here and it would work for you here. So I took a look at it online. It actually wasn't a reality check so much as a Michelle Bachmann bash. Is what it really was. Because I watched about 4 of them and every single one was about Michelle Bachmann. And that's all it was about. So they were doing it over there and they liked it. And we looked at it and our station said, we really wanted to do this and we want you to be the guy behind it. The thing that worked out well for me on that was they said, so take it, run with it, do what you want. Dangerous words. Dangerous words. So that's exactly what I did. Started covering things that I thought were important. And not to be a provocateur or, to create headlines or to shock people. None of that kind of stuff. Just talking about stories that I thought were important. And then it was in November of 2011. We were in a ratings month. Okay, you know how ratings work in TV? You get 4 times a year when you get your ratings. February, May, July, and November. But the only 3 that really count are February, May, and November. So when you watch TV, not that most of you are watching like program TV anymore, most of it's on demand. But when you watch, you'll notice like new episodes show up in those months all of a sudden. That's why, because that's when they set their advertising rates based on how many people are watching. And so it was almost the end of November, and the station's telling me, hey, we want to give you extra time for some of these segments because we really want to promote them in November. So we need one more, at the end of November to really hit it hard. We need something from you. And there were all these debates that were starting up. And I had been sitting there watching a debate. And you guys have heard about the Ron Paul getting 89 seconds in a debate? You've heard about that? I was the guy who counted the 89 seconds. That's where this comes from. Yeah. And it was only because I didn't care about Ron Paul, didn't know anything about him. He was the crazy man at the end of the stage who never gets to talk. But I am a journalist, and so I'm looking at polling, and I'm looking at the polls that have come out and where he stands, and somehow that crazy man at the end of the stage is polling 3rd in a lot of these polls. And there's, 12 candidates running for president. And so even though he is polling 3rd, you never hear him speak. So who likes this guy? Who's supporting him? Where are his backers? I don't really see them in media. So we're going through and looking at this, and I'm watching a debate, and then Rick Santorum is speaking, and I notice he speaks a lot. And I look at the poll, and he's 12 out of 12. He's in last place. So I later went back and took that clip, and I timed it and said he got 89 seconds, and the other guy got 5 minutes and 49 seconds. And that was the piece we did, and it was called What's So Wrong with Ron Paul? And the idea was not to promote Ron Paul, because as I told you, I honestly knew nothing about the man. But it was to say, why is it that this guy who's polling so well gets no time? It was just supposed to be a question. And it turned into a revolution at our station. Because once this story hit, it got picked up by sites that I didn't even know existed. A place called the Daily Paul, you've heard of that?
Yeah.
I had no idea what that was. And then some other place called Ron Paul Forums. I didn't know what that was. And all of a sudden, my Facebook is like blowing up with thousands of people saying, hey man, way to go, good job, talking about Ron Paul. Well, I guess these are the people who are getting them up in the polls, right? They all suddenly come along. And then they start challenging me saying, yeah, we're surprised you would talk about this because there's this big media blackout. And by the way, all these people who are on my Facebook have these black stripes across their faces. I'm like, these people are stupid. Why does everyone have a black stripe on their face? Well, then somebody tells me that's our protest. It's the Black This Out movement because the media blacks out Ron Paul. No, they don't. I don't know what you're talking about. The media's not blacking out Ron Paul. They're like, really, the media won't talk about him. Look at the positions that he takes, look at his stances, go to his website, check him out, see what he's saying, and then tell me if media will talk about him. So that's what I did. It actually, a lot of this began as a challenge from Ron Paul supporters saying, just look at what the media industry is doing. So I started looking. Again, not being a Paul supporter, but I started looking at it. Looking at his positions and saying, okay, that makes sense. Well, that's interesting. Well, at least he has a different point of view from everybody else. Maybe there's some truth to it. Then I started watching how other media would talk about him. And all of a sudden what you find is, you hear there's a poll and, Rick Perry finishes first in this poll. And Newt Gingrich finishes third in the poll. And Herman Cain's fourth. And you're like, wait a minute. But I'm looking at the poll as a journalist and saying, no, I saw who the number 2 guy was. It was Ron Paul. But they wouldn't say his name. And then literally started listening to see if they would say his name. And they wouldn't say his name on TV. So I got blown away. Like my head exploded. Because all of a sudden, all these people with stripes across their faces on Facebook are right. So I started covering it. And that was really where, for us, things started to change. Started covering these stories, started talking much more about what was happening in the political process, in the campaigns, what was happening in the primaries. Didn't know anything about the delegate process. Didn't know anything about bound or unbound delegates. Didn't know anything about how a lot of this worked. I was I think a pretty smart guy. And a journalist who knew a lot of things about certain things, but knew very little about the electoral system. And so I started covering it and had the help of literally tens of thousands of people across the country saying, here's what's happening in our state, and here's what's happening in Iowa, and here's what's happening in Louisiana, and here's what's happening in Oklahoma, and explaining to me this is our process. And so I'd start researching each state by state. And I was blown away by how all this worked, and that each state was so different, and that in some states, it's a caucus, and others it's a primary. In some states, you're not even really voting for a candidate. You're just voting for your neighbor who's going to go and represent you in Tampa or at the RNC eventually. And so for me, it was an education. So I find myself becoming educated on this and then using this platform that I've been given to try to educate the rest of the country on it. Well, what we found was there was a massive audience hungry and waiting for someone to talk about this. And as that audience grew, my bosses looked at it at times and said, no one cares. Stop talking about this. It's weird and you're obsessed with it. And I understood where they were coming from, but I'd have to explain to them, no, it's not so much about that as it is, this is a legitimate issue that's not being covered anyplace else. And we have an opportunity here. Just from a business standpoint, we have an opportunity to talk about something nobody else will. We have an audience, a captive audience. Now, I told some people this last night, and I'll tell you today. Had I not had literally tens of thousands of people piling onto a Facebook page, literally hundreds of thousands of people circulating reports, which eventually would become millions of people, which eventually would become over 10 million in 140 countries. If I had not had that support, 2 weeks after I started talking about this, it would have ended. So a lot of the opportunity that was given to me was not my own. It was an opportunity given by you, and I thank you for that. I thank every single one of you for that. I'm humbled to be able to talk to you about this stuff because I'm not an important person. I'm not a person of great value or somebody who is superior to my colleagues or other journalists. I'm just a guy who wanted to know the truth and started seeking it and had the support of other people and therefore was able to continue to do what I was doing. And I consider myself incredibly blessed to be able to do that. So having done that, you guys know what happened with Reality Check. It blew up. It became this huge thing. It was a great deal. And then we expanded out from there. And it wasn't just about the election anymore. We started talking about issues like the Federal Reserve Bank. And we talked about the NDAA. We talked about the president's kill list and the constitutionality of it. I was the first reporter in the country, or anywhere in the world, to confront the president, as you probably know, face to face about the constitutionality of a kill list. And it wasn't yeah, I'll take that. It wasn't a gotcha question. It wasn't a, hey, I want to impress people or I want to make headlines. It was a, I have 5 kids who were jumping on a trampoline back there. And for me, I want to know why this president believes he has that power. Because as I read the Constitution, he does not have this power. And it's not, and if you've watched the interview and you know exactly how I phrased the question, what president, regardless of party or person, because I don't want George W. Bush to have that power, and I don't want Mitt Romney to have that power, and I don't want John McCain to have that power, and I don't want Ron Paul to have that power, because they don't have it. And therefore, we have to hold those who are in power accountable because of rule of law, not because we like this one and we think he'll be a good guy and he'll do good things with it.